Marcus Chen pulled his thermal jacket tighter as the wind howled through the research station's outer corridors. The storm had been raging for 3 days now, and the temperature gauges showed minus 42 degrees Celsius. Even with the station's heating systems running at full capacity, the cold seemed to seep through every crack and joint in the structure. He was supposed to be heading home to Earth next week after completing his 2-year assignment on Kepler 442b, but the storm had grounded all transport ships. The planet's weather patterns were notoriously unpredictable, but this blizzard was breaking records even by local standards. Marcus checked the perimeter sensors one more time before heading to his quarters. The readings showed nothing but swirling snow and ice as far as the instruments could detect. Then something caught his eye. A faint energy signature, barely registering on the thermal scanners, about 2 kilometers northeast of the station. At first, he assumed it was debris from a damaged weather monitoring satellite. The storm had been wreaking havoc on orbital equipment all week, but the signature was pulsing in a regular pattern, almost like a distress beacon. Marcus frowned and adjusted the scanner's sensitivity. The energy pattern wasn't from any human technology he recognized. It was too organic, too irregular. His training as a xenobiologist kicked in as he studied the readings more carefully. The thermal output suggested something alive, but the temperature was so low that whatever it was should have been dead hours ago. Marcus grabbed his emergency kit and started suiting up for an outside expedition. The rational part of his mind told him he was being foolish. Venturing out into a storm like this was basically suicide. But something about those readings bothered him. If there was even a chance that some form of life was out there struggling to survive, he couldn't just ignore it. The station's safety protocols tried to stop him from leaving. Warning lights flashed red as he approached the outer airlock. The computer's synthetic voice announced that external conditions were beyond safe operational parameters. Marcus overrode the warnings with his senior researcher authorization codes. The moment he stepped outside, the wind nearly knocked him flat. The cold hit him like a physical blow, even through his insulated suit. His visor's heads-up display immediately warned him that his suit's power systems were working overtime to maintain internal temperature. At this rate, he had maybe 90 minutes before hypothermia became a serious concern. Marcus activated his suit's navigation system and began trudging through the knee-deep snow toward the energy signature. Each step was a struggle against the howling wind. Ice crystals pelted his visor, making visibility almost zero. He had to stop every few minutes to clear the accumulating snow from his equipment. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes, Marcus reached the coordinates. At first, he saw nothing but more snow and ice. Then he noticed a slight depression in the ground, partially sheltered by an outcropping of rocks. As he approached, his thermal scanner went crazy. Hidden beneath a thin layer of snow and ice was what looked like the wreckage of some kind of vehicle. But this wasn't human technology. The metal had an iridescent quality that seemed to shift colors even in the dim light of the storm. Strange symbols were etched along what might have been the hull. Marcus carefully cleared away the snow with his gloved hands. The vehicle was small, maybe the size of a personal transport pod. Part of the hull had been torn open, probably during impact. He aimed his suit's lights into the opening and immediately gasped. Inside were 3 small figures, huddled together for warmth. They were clearly not human. Their skin was pale white, almost translucent, and covered in fine, downy fur. They had large, dark eyes that seemed to take up half their faces. Most remarkably, they appeared to be very young, possibly infants of whatever species they belonged to. The creatures were barely moving, their breathing so shallow it was almost undetectable. Marcus's scanner indicated their core body temperature was dangerously low, even by the standards of whatever biology they possessed. They were dying of cold exposure. Without hesitation, Marcus began carefully extracting the small beings from the wreckage. They were surprisingly light, each one weighing maybe 10 kilograms. Their body temperature was so low that even through his insulated gloves they felt like ice. He quickly assessed his options. The station was nearly an hour away through the storm, and these creatures wouldn't survive the journey in their current condition. His suit's emergency thermal systems weren't designed to warm multiple organisms simultaneously. But there was one thing he could do. Marcus opened his jacket and began placing the alien infants against his chest, directly against his body heat. The cold that immediately penetrated his thermal layers was shocking. His suit's internal heaters screamed warnings as they tried to compensate for the dramatic heat loss. The first creature stirred slightly at the contact with his warm skin. Its large eyes fluttered open, focusing on Marcus with what seemed like confusion and fear. He spoke softly, knowing the creature probably couldn't understand his words, but hoping his tone might be reassuring. "It's okay, little one. I'm going to get you somewhere warm." Marcus sealed his jacket as best he could with the 3 aliens pressed against his body. The cold was immediate and intense. His core temperature began dropping within minutes. But the creature's body heat started to rise slightly, which gave him hope. The journey back to the station was a nightmare. The wind had picked up even more, and visibility was down to less than 3 meters. Marcus stumbled through the snow, his body shaking uncontrollably from the cold. Several times he fell, each time careful to protect the small beings he was carrying. His suit's warning systems were going insane. Core temperature dropping, power reserves critically low, estimated survival time decreasing by the minute. But Marcus pushed forward, driven by something deeper than logic. These creatures were someone's children, and they needed his help. About halfway back to the station, one of the aliens began making soft chirping sounds. The noise was weak but distinctly vocal, not just breathing or unconscious responses. Marcus felt a surge of hope. They were becoming more responsive as their body temperature rose. By the time Marcus reached the station's outer perimeter, his legs could barely carry him. He was hypothermic, exhausted, and his suit's power was down to 15%. But the 3 alien infants were noticeably more active, their breathing stronger and their large eyes alert. Getting through the airlock was a challenge. The decontamination protocols wanted to scan everything he brought in, but Marcus overrode them again. These creatures needed immediate warmth, not bureaucratic procedures. Inside the station, Marcus immediately headed for the medical bay. He placed the aliens in one of the isolation chambers and began raising the temperature gradually. Too much heat too quickly could be just as dangerous as the cold they'd endured. As the chamber warmed, the creatures became increasingly active. They huddled together but kept looking at Marcus through the transparent walls. Their large eyes seemed to track his every movement with what looked like curiosity rather than fear. Marcus collapsed into a nearby chair, finally allowing himself to feel the full extent of his exhaustion. His hands were still shaking from the cold, and every muscle in his body ached. But watching the 3 aliens slowly recover made every moment of suffering worth it. He began running medical scans on the creatures, trying to understand their basic biology. The results were fascinating. Their cellular structure was unlike anything in the human databases. They seemed to be adapted for much warmer climates, which explained why the cold had nearly killed them. More importantly, the scans suggested they were indeed very young, possibly equivalent to human infants or toddlers. Someone's babies had been out there dying in the storm, and Marcus had found them just in time. As he watched them gradually becoming more active, Marcus realized he was witnessing something unprecedented. These were the first living aliens ever encountered by humanity, and he had just saved their lives by risking his own. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside the medical bay, 3 small alien beings were alive and growing stronger by the hour. Marcus had no idea what species they belonged to, where they had come from, or how their vehicle had ended up crashed on this frozen world. But one thing was certain. His life had just changed forever. And somewhere in the galaxy, someone was probably desperately searching for these 3 precious lives that now depended entirely on the warmth and protection of a single human who had been willing to risk everything to save them. The storm finally broke on the 4th day. Marcus had barely slept during that time, constantly monitoring the 3 alien infants and trying to understand their needs. He had managed to determine that they could digest a modified nutrient solution similar to what human babies might need, though he was careful to test everything in small amounts first. The creatures had grown remarkably active as they warmed up and recovered their strength. They made soft chirping and trilling sounds that seemed to be some form of communication. More surprisingly, they appeared to recognize Marcus specifically, becoming agitated whenever he left their sight for too long. On the morning when the weather finally cleared, Marcus was in the middle of feeding the youngest of the 3 when the station's long-range sensors detected something approaching from orbit. The signature was massive, far larger than any human vessel, and it was moving with technology that defied conventional propulsion systems. Marcus's hands shook as he set down the feeding tube. He had known this moment would come eventually. Whoever these creatures belonged to would eventually come looking for them. The question was whether they would see Marcus as a rescuer or a threat. The alien vessel entered the planet's atmosphere with barely a whisper of atmospheric disturbance. Through the station's observation windows, Marcus could see it descending like a massive pearl, its surface smooth and gleaming with the same iridescent quality as the crashed vehicle he had found. As it settled onto the landing pad outside the station, Marcus realized the ship was easily 10 times larger than the research facility. Whoever had built it possessed technology centuries beyond human capabilities. The fact that they had found this remote research station so quickly suggested their scanning abilities were equally advanced. Marcus gathered the 3 alien infants in his arms. They seemed to sense something was happening, chirping excitedly and looking toward the windows as if they could detect the presence of their own kind. He took a deep breath and walked toward the station's main airlock. The beings that emerged from the ship were obviously the adult version of the species he had been caring for. They stood nearly 3 meters tall, with the same translucent white skin and fine fur, but their proportions were more elegant and elongated. Their large, dark eyes held an intelligence that was immediately apparent, and they moved with a grace that suggested they came from a world with lighter gravity than Earth. There were 5 of them, and they approached the station with obvious caution. Marcus activated the external communication system and spoke slowly and clearly. "I am Marcus Chen, a human researcher. I found 3 of your young ones during the storm. They were injured and cold, but they are alive and safe." The lead alien stopped and tilted its head, studying Marcus through the reinforced windows. When it spoke, its voice was melodic, like a combination of singing and spoken language. To Marcus's amazement, the station's translation system managed to render it into something approaching English. "Human Marcus Chen. I am Zithara of the Vellani people. We have traveled far to retrieve our lost offspring. You speak of storm and cold. Our young cannot survive such conditions. How do they yet live?" Marcus looked down at the 3 infants in his arms. The youngest was making soft, trilling sounds and reaching toward the windows where the adult Vellani waited. "I found them during a blizzard. Their transport had crashed. They were dying from exposure to the cold. I brought them inside and kept them warm until they recovered." There was a long pause. The alien called Zithara exchanged rapid musical communications with the others. Their large eyes showed expressions that Marcus couldn't quite interpret. But there was definitely surprise and something that might have been disbelief. "Human Marcus Chen, you speak of surviving in conditions that would kill our kind in mere moments. The storm you describe registered temperatures that would freeze Vellani blood solid. How did you retrieve our young from such environment? Marcus hesitated. He wasn't sure how to explain that what had nearly killed him was just another harsh day by human standards. I used protective equipment and thermal gear. The cold was dangerous but manageable. Your young needed immediate help. Another exchange of rapid Villani speech. This time, Marcus could hear what sounded like amazement in their voices. May we enter your structure to reclaim our offspring? We would also understand how you accomplished this preservation of life. Marcus activated the airlock sequence. Of course, but please understand that I had to improvise their care. I'm not familiar with your biology. As the Villani entered the station, Marcus was struck by how graceful they were despite their size. Their large eyes took in every detail of the human environment with obvious fascination. When they saw the three infants in Marcus's arms, their entire demeanor changed. The youngest Villani infant immediately began chirping excitedly and reached toward the adult aliens. But when one of them tried to take the infant from Marcus, the little creature clung to his shirt and made distressed sounds. Zithara's head tilted in a gesture that seemed universal for confusion. The young one displays bonding behavior toward you. Human Marcus Chen. This is most unusual. Villani young typically bond only with their genetic parents or designated caregivers of their own species. They've been with me for 4 days, Marcus explained. I've been feeding them and keeping them warm. Maybe they're just used to me. You have been their sole caregiver for 4 rotations. Another alien stepped forward, its voice carrying a note of what the translator rendered as wonder. I am Kethani, specialist in young care. Please describe the conditions of their rescue. Marcus walked them to the medical bay where he had been treating the infants. He pulled up the storm data on the main screen, showing the temperature readings and wind speeds during the blizzard. The Villani fell silent as they studied the information. Finally, Kethani spoke in hushed tones. Human Marcus Chen. These readings indicate surface temperatures of -42 degrees in your measurement system, wind speeds exceeding 150 units. Duration of exposure in these conditions would be... The alien paused, consulting a device that appeared in its elongated hands. Fatal to Villani physiology within 3 minutes. How did you survive long enough to reach our young, much less return with them? I wore insulated clothing and used portable heaters, Marcus said simply. The trip took about 90 minutes total. The silence that followed was so complete Marcus could hear the station's air recycling systems humming in the background. Zithara stepped closer, studying Marcus with new intensity. You endured conditions that would kill our species for 90 minutes? While carrying our dying young? I couldn't leave them out there, Marcus replied. They were someone's children. But the risk to your own life was significant? Kethani asked. Yes, but not immediately fatal. Humans are adapted to survive in a wide range of temperatures. We come from what you might consider a harsh world. The Villani exchanged what sounded like rapid, excited conversation. Marcus caught words that the translator rendered as impossible, death world, and something that might have been legend. Finally, Zithara approached Marcus and made a gesture that involved placing its long-fingered hands over its heart. Human Marcus Chen, we have traveled the galaxy for many cycles. We have encountered numerous species across countless worlds. But never have we witnessed such sacrifice from one species to preserve the lives of another. You risked death to save young that were not your own, of a species you had never encountered. What you describe aligns with certain stories told among our people, another Villani added. Ancient tales speak of a warrior species from a death world, beings who could survive where others could not, who valued life above their own survival. We believed these to be myths. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold he had endured during the storm. I'm not a warrior. I'm a researcher, and I just did what anyone would do. No, human Marcus Chen, Zithara said softly. You did what a Vellani guardian would do, what a protector does. Our young have bonded with you because they recognize in you the same spirit that drives us to defend our offspring with our lives. The youngest infant in Marcus's arms began chirping again, this time in what sounded like contentment. It had wrapped its tiny fingers around one of the buttons on his shirt and showed no inclination to let go. "There is something more," Kethani said hesitantly. "Our young were not simply lost in a storm. They were being evacuated from a world under attack by raiders who steal offspring to sell to collectors of rare species. Their transport was damaged during escape and crashed here. Without your intervention, they would have died, and their loss would have devastated their birth parents." Marcus looked down at the three small beings he had been caring for. He had saved them not just from the cold, but from a fate that was unimaginably worse. "I'm glad I could help," he said quietly. "Help?" Zithara's large eyes seemed to glow with emotion. "Human Marcus Chen, you have performed what our people call the Great Preservation. You have saved not just 3 lives, but 3 bloodlines, 3 futures. Among our people, this creates a bond that transcends species." The adult Vellani began making musical sounds together, harmonizing in a way that filled the medical bay with something that felt like reverence. Marcus didn't understand the words, but he understood the meaning. Somehow, in the space of 4 days, he had become something more than just a human who had helped some alien children. He had become part of their story, their culture, their future. And looking at the 3 infants who still clung to him with obvious trust and affection, Marcus realized his own future had just become far more complicated than he had ever imagined. 3 weeks had passed since the Vellani ship had landed at the research station, and Marcus's life had transformed in ways he never could have imagined. What had started as a simple rescue mission during a storm had evolved into something that the Vellani called the greatest honor, a bond between species that their ancient texts claimed was possible but had never been witnessed. The 3 infants, whom Marcus had learned were named Leary, Veth, and Kolar, had refused to be separated from him, despite numerous attempts by the adult Vellani to establish proper care protocols. Every time one of the adults tried to take them back to their ship, the young ones would become distressed and cry until Marcus was visible again. Zithara had explained that this was unprecedented in Vellani history. Their young typically bonded exclusively with their genetic parents, and would only accept care from other Vellani in extreme circumstances. The fact that they had bonded so completely with a human was causing what could only be described as a cultural revolution among their people. "Human Marcus Chen," Zithara said during one of their daily meetings, "our elders have been consulted across 7 star systems. Never in recorded Vellani history has such a bond been documented. Our xenobiologists believe it occurred because you shared your life essence with them during their most vulnerable moment." "Life essence?" Marcus asked, looking up from where he was playing with Kolar, the smallest of the 3. The infant had developed a fascination with Marcus's fingers and was trying to count them with its own tiny hands. "When you placed them against your body during the storm," Kethani explained, "you literally shared your warmth, your heartbeat, your breath. In Vellani culture, this is the most intimate act of preservation possible. It is something normally done only between parent and offspring during the first hours of life." Marcus felt a flush of embarrassment. "I was just trying to keep them alive." "Exactly," Zithara said, with what Marcus had learned was their equivalent of a smile. "You performed the highest act of protection without expectation of reward or recognition. This is the true mark of what our people call a life guardian." The title had been causing considerable excitement among the Vellani. Apparently, life guardians were figures of legend in their culture, beings of such moral strength that they would risk their own existence to protect others, regardless of species or relationship. The concept existed in their mythology, but no living Villani had ever actually witnessed such behavior. "Our Council of Elders wishes to meet with you," Zithara continued. "They are traveling here from the Villani homeworld to witness this bonding themselves. They bring with them artifacts and ceremonies that have not been used for over 1,000 cycles." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. The attention was overwhelming, and he still didn't fully understand why his actions were being treated as extraordinary. "I appreciate the honor, but I'm just a scientist who happened to be in the right place at the right time." "Human Marcus," Kethani said gently, "we have studied your species' records since our arrival. We know that humans regularly risk their lives for others, but what you accomplished was beyond what even your own people might consider normal. You endured conditions that would challenge even your military specialists, while carrying 3 additional lives that you had never seen before." That was true enough. Marcus had reviewed his own actions in the days since the rescue and admitted to himself that he had taken enormous risks. If his suit had failed, or if he had become lost in the storm, all 4 of them would have died. But at the time, the choice had seemed obvious. Over the past weeks, Marcus had been learning about Villani culture and biology. They came from a world with a remarkably stable climate, no seasonal variations, no extreme weather, no temperatures that varied more than 10 degrees throughout their entire year. Their evolution had optimized them for grace, intelligence, and social cooperation, but had left them vulnerable to environmental extremes. In contrast, humans came from what the Villani had classified as a Category 7 death world, a planet with such extreme and variable conditions that most spacefaring species considered it barely habitable. The temperature swings, violent weather, and environmental hazards that humans considered normal would be quickly fatal to most other known species. "There's something else," Zithara said, interrupting Marcus's thoughts. "The young ones have been displaying unusual development patterns since their rescue. Our specialists believe their bonding with you has accelerated their learning abilities." This was something Marcus had noticed himself. Leary, Veth, and Kolar seemed to be picking up English words much faster than their own language development should have allowed. They had already learned to respond to their names when Marcus called them, and yesterday Leary had managed to say Marcus in a way that was clearly intentional. "Is that normal?" Marcus asked. "No," Kethani replied. "Villani young typically require several months to begin vocal communication, but these 3 are developing speech patterns at an accelerated rate. We believe their neural pathways are adapting to mirror some of your cognitive processes." The implications of that were staggering. Marcus was essentially watching 3 alien infants reorganize their brain development to better communicate with their adopted protector. 2 days later, the Villani Council ship arrived. It was a massive vessel, even larger than Zithara's rescue ship, with a hull that seemed to shift colors like an oil slick. As it settled onto an expanded landing pad, Marcus could see dozens of Villani figures moving within its transparent sections. "The Council brings representatives from 47 different Villani colonies," Zithara explained. "Some have traveled for months to witness this event. The bonding ceremony they plan to perform has not been conducted in living memory." Marcus was nervous about the ceremony, but Leary, Veth, and Kolar seemed excited by all the activity. They had grown considerably in the weeks since their rescue and were now mobile enough to crawl around the research station's corridors. They followed Marcus everywhere, creating what the Villani called a protection cluster, a formation where the young stayed close to their guardian at all times. The ceremony itself was unlike anything Marcus had ever experienced. The Villani elders, distinguished by their silver-tinged fur and elaborately decorated robes, arranged themselves in a complex pattern around Marcus and the 3 infants. They began to sing, not words, but pure musical tones that harmonized in ways that seemed to resonate through the station's walls. Elder Vashatai, who appeared to be the most senior member of the council, approached Marcus carrying an artifact that looked like crystallized starlight. "Human Marcus Chen," the elder said in a voice that seemed to carry the weight of centuries. "You have performed an act that we believed existed only in our most ancient stories. You have saved not just 3 lives, but 3 souls. You have proven that the bonds of protection transcend species, world, and evolution itself." The crystal in the elder's hands began to glow as the singing continued. "By the authority of the Villani people, we name you Marcus Chen, life guardian of the eternal bond. May your protection extend to all Villani young, and may their protection extend to you and your people for all generations to come." As the elder placed the crystal against Marcus's forehead, he felt a strange warmth spread through his body. The 3 infants began chirping in harmony with the adult Villani, and for a moment, Marcus could almost understand what they were saying. When the ceremony concluded, Elder Vashatai explained the significance of what had just occurred. "You are now formally recognized as a protector of the Villani people, human Marcus. This means that any Villani, anywhere in the galaxy, will recognize you as family. Your children and their children will carry this protection. And should any human ever need aid that we can provide, it will be given without question." Marcus looked down at Leary, Veth, and Kolar, who had arranged themselves around his feet in their familiar protection cluster. They looked up at him with their large, dark eyes filled with trust and affection. "What happens now?" Marcus asked. "Now," Zithara said with obvious joy, "you have choices to make. You may return to your world, though Leary, Veth, and Kolar will need to remain close to you until they reach maturity. Or you may come with us to see the galaxy through the eyes of those you saved." Marcus considered this carefully. His assignment on Kepler 442b was complete, and he had been planning to return to Earth to write his research reports. But looking at the 3 young Villani who had become so attached to him, he realized his research could wait. "How long until they reach maturity?" he asked. "Approximately 7 of your years," Cathani replied. "During which time you would be welcome to travel with our fleets, to see worlds and species that your own people have not yet encountered. You would be our ambassador, our bridge between human and Villani cultures." The prospect was both terrifying and exhilarating. 7 years among alien civilizations, raising 3 beings whose intelligence and potential were becoming more apparent every day. It wasn't the life Marcus had planned, but it was the life that had found him. 3 days later, Marcus sent a carefully crafted message to his supervisors on Earth, explaining that he would be extending his off-world assignment indefinitely for cultural research opportunities of unprecedented significance. He didn't mention the 3 alien infants who were currently learning to walk by holding on to his hands, or the fact that he was now considered a legendary figure among an entire spacefaring civilization. As the combined Villani fleet prepared to depart Kepler 442b, Marcus stood in the observation deck of Zithara's ship, watching his old research station shrink into the distance. Leary was sleeping in his arms, while Veth and Kolar played nearby under the watchful eyes of their Villani caregivers. In saving 3 lives during a storm, Marcus had discovered something about humanity that even he hadn't fully understood. Humans didn't just survive in harsh conditions. They thrived in them. They didn't just protect their own kind. They protected life itself, regardless of its origin. They didn't just adapt to their environment. They adapted to fulfill whatever role was needed. As the ship jumped to hyperspace, beginning a journey that would take them to the heart of Villani civilization, Marcus realized that his real education was just beginning. He was about to learn not just about alien cultures and technologies, but about what it truly meant to be human among the stars. And somewhere in the galaxy, other species were about to learn something equally important: that the universe had produced at least one species capable of crossing every barrier to preserve life, driven by nothing more than the simple belief that every child, regardless of origin, deserved a chance to grow up.